SaWGuy podcast.
Like scary movies. What's your favorite scary movie?
Here's Johnny.
We'll tear your soul apart.
The boogeyman is real, and you found him.
Game over, man. Game over.
What do you want?
I want to hear you scream. From the front time, bitch.
Now, who's the dummy?
Welcome to the SaWGuy. I'm hearing voices. It's not them, right? No? I just don't know where it's coming from. Welcome to the SaWGuy podcast. As always, y'all know I am the SaWGuy. I had to do a little wink right there to one of my favorite old-time TV shows, The Hulk. And not only that, also too, I couldn't talk about this episode. This is episode 36, Dead Silence, without bringing back Possessed Billy. He's a fan favorite. I get shit all the time. Everyone's like, you have so many other masks. Why do you always wear the other one that says Ouija? Well, because that's my main one, obviously, but you know, this is a classic. I gotta bring this one out for this episode because, you know, you can't talk about Dead Silence without wearing a ventriloquist dummy-looking mask, right? But anyways, as I said, most people, well, most of us horror fans have heard of Dead Silence. The sad part is, with Dead Silence, is that most didn't hear about it until later on in like 2010, 2011, and the main reason is because when this film was released, it was released in March 16th of 2007. I was going to say 17, but I caught myself right there, right? But it was released the same day as 300. And everybody knows what happened when 300 came out. Everybody went to go see it. No one saw or even heard of Dead Silence. But, you know, I'm going to give it its love that it deserves, right? So, what is Dead Silence, right? It's a film done by one of my favorite horror directors and writers, James Wan and Leigh Whannell, right? So this movie came out in an odd little time because Saw 1 and 2 had already came out. They were working on releasing Saw 3, but in between Saw 2 and 3, they filmed this movie. And the best part about this film, it's done by everybody who's worked on Saw, like the original people who did it. The production designer, Charlie Closer, who does the Saw theme, Hello Zep. He worked on this film. And you had Leigh Whannell, you know, who played Adam, and who also wrote Saw with James Wan. He wrote this film with James Wan, and they produced this film, and they released it. And it was actually done by Universal Pictures, which blew me off, you know, because I was just like, what the fuck? All this time, I didn't think it was Universal Pictures, and then when I started doing this episode, I was like, holy shit, I didn't know that Universal did this. But it's pretty cool. It's a cool little wink. But anyways, the movie stars, of course, you know, from Saw 2 fame, Donnie Wahlberg, right? The other main actors, I guess you could say Judith Roberts. She plays Mary Shaw, one of the characters in this film, but most people don't know who she is. I mean, she played in some older horror films and random TV shows, but she's more well-known now because she starred on the Netflix TV show Orange is the New Black. And I guess in one of the more recent seasons, I guess. But anyways, this film... What I love about it, obviously with James Wan and Leigh Whannell, they love doing horror movies that involves little creepy puppets. And this whole film is all about creepy little puppets. And it ties in this ghost story into it. And what's even cool about this film is the fact that, you know, because it didn't get so much respect that it deserved, they used it as inspiration to make other good horror films. Like, take for instance, this film came out in 2007. In 2010, they released Insidious. And later on, they did, you know, well, Leigh Whannell didn't do it, but James Wan did it. He did The Conjuring, but it also introduced the character Annabelle, right? All that came because of this film, and a lot of people forget about that. But anyways, like I do in every episode, I'm going to break it all down for you, you know, tell you the whole movie and everything, and throw in a little bit of tidbits. Let me know in the comments below what you guys think of Dead Silence. If you enjoyed the film, if you still haven't seen it, what's wrong with you? But anyways, I'll break it down for you, right? So Dead Silence, this whole film follows this guy, and his name is Jamie Ashen. And it follows how he's living this perfect life, you know, this dream life. You know, it's him. They never said if it was his wife or his girlfriend or anything like that, but basically they're living their own, you know, fantasy world. Well, I shouldn't say fantasy world. They're living the life, you know. He's fixing the sink, you know. They're trying to cook dinner and everything, and then it's raining outside like in every horror film. She basically says, okay, well, stop doing that shit. Go ahead and pick up the Chinese food or order Chinese food so we can, you know, hang out. He's like, okay, you know. Then they hear this knock on the door, right? They see that it's this big-ass package, and they're like, who the hell would send this to us, right? No name, no return address, nothing like that, right? And so they get this package, and what do people do when they get a big-ass package? Bust it open, right? Ends up being this creepy ventriloquist doll. And they don't know where the hell it came from, but then they started remembering, oh, remember that poem that we used to hear as kids from where we were from? Because they're from a small little town called, what was it, Ravens Fair. Well, anyways, you know, they thought nothing of it. They're like, whatever. So he goes and picks up the Chinese food. And while he's gone, his wife is just messing with the doll. And she basically says, okay, well, if you don't watch, you know, you get to see me for 7 seconds or something stupid like that. So she puts the doll on the bed, and then all of a sudden it starts, like, creeping, and then the mouth just drops, right? She gets all freaked out. She puts a bed sheet over it, and then all of a sudden she starts hearing noises. Then all of a sudden it just, sounds started going, ooh, and then all the sound was gone, which is fucking creepy, right? Then all of a sudden she goes closer to it, and then all of a sudden it fucking grabs her and throws the sheet. She's wrestling with it and everything like that. All of a sudden, it picks her up and then throws her halfway across the room, like in the hallway. And then all of a sudden, you hear the eerie music, right? And then she starts spitting out blood, and it's like, what the fuck? You know, because you don't even know what happens at this point. They don't show anything. All of a sudden, she's spitting out blood. She turns around, and then she's screaming as she's getting dragged back, right? Jamie, on the other hand, he's already got the Chinese food. He's going to surprise his wife with a rose and everything. And then he goes into the house. Well, I shouldn't say house. They lived in an apartment. It was a big-ass apartment, though. But anyways, he hears the water boiling with the teapot. He takes it out, and he's telling her, what the hell are you trying to do? Burn that in the house? Right? And, you know, then he hears her voice who says, I'm in the bedroom. And he's like, oh, I guess dinner in bed again, you know? Puts it, you know, the rose in his mouth, tries to be Rico Suave and shit. And all of a sudden, he walks, and then he starts sliding, right? He looks around, he sees a fucking puddle of blood. Then he sees that, you know, it looks like the dummy, you know, sitting on the bed with the bed sheet still, right? All of a sudden, he goes up, pulls out the bed sheet. His fucking wife is missing her tongue, and she's like this, you know? I was like, what the fuck is this? This is some creepy-ass cool shit, right? So anyways, you know, they show that the cops get on scene, they put her in the body bag, all that stuff. And then, you know, he's, you know, waiting to give a statement inside the police. And then you see, I was going to say Detective Matthews. It's actually Detective Lipton. I don't know where they got the name from, but Detective Lipton. And it's played by, guess who? Guess who? It was Donnie Wahlberg, right? So anyways, he comes in there, and his character is completely different from Saw. You know, he still plays a he still plays a detective, but he's more or less just like, all right, what is he heading for? Oh, yeah, killing his wife. And then he has one of those electric shavers, so he's shaving himself the whole fucking way. And so they start talking, right? They start talking about, hey, you want to give me your alibi? And he goes, what do you mean your alibi? You know? Because he believes that Jamie killed his wife. And Jamie's like, how the fuck is that possible? I came in and she had no tongue and there was blood everywhere. And he was like, well, you know how many times I've heard that from people who've given their wives roses before they killed them? You know? He said something along those lines. And he basically told him, like, hey, don't leave town because you're considered a suspect, but not really a suspect. You know, it's kind of like that gray area, right? So he's like, all right, whatever. So Jamie, he drives back to where he's from in Ravens Fair. It's this run-down town at this point. You know, they show that it's like this nice, prestigious, old-time town, but it's all run down when he gets into it. You know, he's driving around, he sees all these vacant buildings and shit. And he goes there to see his dad. And apparently, they don't explain the character very much until you actually see he goes to this big-ass mansion house. And he goes to that house because he wants to go see his dad, right? Well, the his dad was actually really rich, but I don't know, if they were like one of the town founders or something. They never explained that. They just showed that, it was just him and his dad. His dad had been married to like 7 different women because he was a dick. And he goes and sees his dad, and he's there with another woman, right? And the other woman, her name is Ella, and his dad's name is Edward. And so he's talking to his dad, and his dad's like, oh, my condolences on your wife, how you been? And, right off the bat, Jamie thought something was up. He's like, wait a minute, why the hell are you being nice? Like, how come you're not drinking and being a drunk, And, he basically storms out after he, starts asking about Mary Shaw, right? And they're all like, oh, well, it's just an old folktale, So after that happens, then he goes and leaves and gets checked into a hotel. And this is where it starts fucking with him, right? He goes to the hotel, and he's sitting there. He's already ready to go to bed and everything. He starts laying down. He pulls out, I don't know why the fuck he brings the puppet. Of all things, he brings a puppet. And he brings a puppet, the puppet's sitting there, and all of a sudden, same thing starts going down. He starts to go to sleep. Then all of a sudden, he starts hearing, ooh, and it's quiet, right? And all of a sudden, he hears, like, this head move, these eyes move. He gets up, and then he sees this fucking creepy lady just smiling right there, and he turns on his light hella quick, right? It was kind of trippy, It was really creepy how they did that, because they were building anticipation, right? And, well, anyways, he goes to sleep, and then wakes up and finds out that Detective Lipton, the detective who had interviewed him, Donnie Wahlberg, he basically said, hey, I thought I told you to not leave town. He's like, well, my wife wanted to be buried back in our hometown, so, He's like, all right, well, just remember I'm watching you. So then it goes that he goes to see the, the mortician, and pick out, different caskets and stuff like that, right? And the mortician, his name is Henry. And he's been around forever. I mean, his father was in it, so it's one of those generational things. And Henry, he had a wife who, she kind of seemed crazy. Like, she was just, like, sitting there, like, talking to the crows and everything like that. And, he was just, like, taking a straw from it, right? He goes and talks to Henry about things. And then, he starts asking Henry about Mary Shaw. And then, he tells him, well, nobody says her name. They don't want any of that trouble there, da-da-da-da-da. And his wife kept interrupting and saying, well, hey, you're in trouble, you and that doll. You should bury that doll back, And he's like, all right, whatever. Then it starts the funeral, and it shows, the sad moments where it's just him. I think his dad's new wife was there, Ella. And then, you had the mortician and everybody. They were, saying their final goodbyes, right? And that's when he starts talking to Marion again, and she starts telling him, you need to bury the doll. You need to bury the doll. You're going to be in trouble. Henry comes and pulls her away because he thinks that she's acting crazy. And then all of a sudden he walks up to this gravestone, and it sees this gravestone of Mary Shaw. And he's just like taken back by it. So then he gets the idea to go and bury the doll, right? So after he buries the doll, he goes back, and when he's at the hotel, all of a sudden he hears a knock. And all of a sudden it ends up being Detective Lipton. Or I think he sneaks in or something like that, right? And he tells him, why the hell are you trying to bury the doll? Is it because it was evidence in a crime that you committed? So they were going a lot of back and forth into this. And, when it was, like, Jamie started putting the pieces together on things. And then finally he just snapped and just went over there back to Henry's and brought the doll and basically said, okay, tell me everything that's wrong with this situation here. Tell me everything about Mary Shaw. And I thought this was pretty cool because it goes into the old times about how Mary Shaw, she was a ventriloquist. She had her own, like, theatrical place. It was built on this little island with, like, a moat around it. And, Henry tells the story about what happened, right? How she was killed and everything. She basically put on a show, and when she was putting on the show with the main dummy, Billy, that ends up being... James Wan always names all of his dummies Billy. I don't know why. I guess it's a common name. I guess it fits it well, I guess. But anyways, he starts talking about the story about how she was doing a show with Billy, and how this kid, he basically came out and said, I can see your lips moving. And she got pissed, right? So she basically called out the kid while they're both talking and said, okay, who's the dummy now? And then Henry tells the whole story where he's like, well, I was a boy when that happened, and after that incident, no one ever saw him again, And then they talked about how Mary Shaw, she basically, everybody assumed that Mary Shaw had something to do with it, so they broke into the place where she lived at, which was this auditorium. They go in there, they pull out her tongue, and they cut her tongue off, right? Which is where they start talking about this poem, where it's like, if she ever hears you scream, she'll rip your tongue from the scene, right? And it was because they pulled out her tongue and cut it off, right? Well, in her will, this is very odd, because she was a single old lady who had no children, only dolls, just like the poem said. And when she was buried, she wanted to be turned into a doll. And so Henry tells a story about how, my father, the mortician, he basically, did her last dying wish, which was to turn into a doll. And she wanted to have all of her dolls buried. And she had 101 fucking ventriloquist dolls. I mean, you kind of see the similarities here between me and SaWGuy, right? I know, I'm laughing at that shit. But, anyways, while that's going on, then it shows Detective Lipton, who kind of, Jamie tells him the story about everything. So he goes over there and he's like, okay, let me see if this is true. He starts, digging the graves of all the dummies. And once he pulls out the little, coffins holding the dummies, there's nothing in it. And then it keeps showing like flashes of back and forth of their story and shit. Then all of a sudden, he finally catches up with Jamie when Jamie went to his father's house again to find out what the fuck is going on, right? And as Jamie left, all of a sudden, Marion, his wife, was like talking to Billy, right? And then he was like, I don't want to hear any of this. So he goes and locks Billy underneath, like this, what do you call it? Kind of like this little basement attic thing, And anyways, he starts hearing Marion's voice. And, she has these moments where she goes underneath, like, the house and stuff. And he went in there, because he thought he heard her voice. Then all of a sudden, the door right behind him shuts. Then he starts freaking out, like, oh my God. Then you see Mary Shaw in the corner, just slithering. And all of a sudden, she sees him right there, and then she smiles. Then he screams, and she gets him. She rips out his tongue and everything. After that happened, Jamie was on his way to go see his dad. He starts talking to his dad, and then after that, he was just like, whatever, I'm done with it. I'm getting the fuck out of town. That's when he gets a phone call from Henry, who at this point is already dead, Us as the audience, we know that, but Jamie doesn't know that. And so Detective Lipton, he goes and follows him. And he says, hey, I went into town and talked to everybody about Mary Shaw. Nobody knows what the fuck I'm talking about. And then he's like, it's a ghost story. She's crazy. You gotta listen to me. And there's evidence. Henry's over there at the auditorium. We need to go over there now. He's like, well, no, I'm gonna arrest you. He basically pushes him down. There was some dark humor in there where Jamie, he gets in his car. He has one of those old muscle classic cars. Takes off, and he's like, fuck, I don't even have a full tank of gas. So he's chasing after him, right? So Detective Lipton and Jamie, they're going to this old-ass auditorium, right? They get there, and then all of a sudden, Detective Lipton, he's not stupid. He carried a shotgun with him. So they go in there, and they find out that, where the whole stage is and everything. Then they have to go up on top and then go into, like, the separate room. And it has this weird, eerie feeling. And this is what I love about this scene, is that once they went in there, they start seeing weird things, Like, it looks like there's a wall within a wall back here. And so he walks in, and then it looks like he turns around and says, don't scream. Then he goes, and it's like he disappeared. I mean, just James Wan, he's amazing with his effects. He really was. But anyways, they go in there, and they hear all these weird things, right? And then they see that there's this boy who's, like, deteriorating, like, hanging on a puppet. Comes to find out, it ends up being that it was Jamie Ashen, his whole family bloodline. It was all affected because of this kid. This kid was his great uncle. And, that's where he's kind of, like, piecing together, like, hey, she's only tormenting, the family bloodline of the Ashens, right? Then all of a sudden they're like, okay, whatever, it's bullshit. They back up. All of a sudden this big-ass clock comes down, and it shows all these puppets. And the scene that I love about this puppet is that out of all these puppets in the case, off the corner, you could see, Billy the Puppet from Saw. Or most people at this time, they were calling him Jigsaw. They didn't know the name of, the Jigsaw doll, so they kept saying, oh, it's Jigsaw in the corner. No, his name's Billy, too. What's even cooler about it is that when you actually pause it, like freeze frame where it shows all the dummies, you can actually see Annabelle in there, too. Which is why I said this film is so underrated, because it gave creation to all these other different characters. Right? And, later on, when they see all that, they're all like, okay, you know, something's weird. Then they see this one oddball one. And this is the one character, well, one character. This is the one dummy that everybody always likes and you see in the trailers everywhere, right? It's the clown one that's sitting right there on the rocking chair, right? And then he basically goes up and says, hey, why are you doing this? And then the rocking chair stops and says, come closer and I'll tell you. It's like, whoa, what the fuck? You know, and so Detective Lipton, he's like, no. So he goes up and then literally he's like right here in the ear. And then basically Mary Shaw fills him in and says, well, you're not the last Ashen. The last Ashen was in, you know, your girlfriend or your wife, Lisa. So he basically found out right then and there that his wife was pregnant. Which they kind of gave it away in the beginning where she was like touching her stomach and stuff like that. And, you know, it was kind of fucked up and surreal. And it was like, what? And then all of a sudden this tongue starts licking his face. He pulls back and then the dummy starts laughing. And then you see Mary Shaw grabs the dummy to stop. Then you see Mary Shaw's face pulls up. And then Detective Lipton, he starts shooting, you know, the dummies. And then they figured out, oh shit, she's only alive through the dummies. We got to kill all the dummies, right? So they start shooting them one by one. Boom, boom. Then they said, okay, fuck it, you know. Throw a Molotov cocktail on it. They start running out, and then the bridge on the top gave way. Then when it gave way, basically you see Detective Lipton falling. Ah! And guess what he was doing? He was screaming with his mouth open. Mary Shaw comes in, shows him like a dummy. Ah! Falling down. Then he basically gets the fuck out of there, you know. He falls down, goes into, because, you know, it's built on a lake or a moat or something like that. And he falls through. I don't know how the fuck he holds his breath this long, but he holds his breath long enough to get under and then out, gets in his car, and then he goes to his dad's house to tell him everything. As he gets over there, you know, he starts trying to talk to his dad, right? And as he's talking to his dad, you know, he's like, why the hell is he slumped over? Because he's just slumped over, right? He goes over there, and he sees his fucking dad has been dead for a long time because you see, like, you know, there's a spine, kind of like a wood. How do you say it? It's basically set up like a ventriloquist dummy. You know, there's the wood right there so you can control it and everything. And all of a sudden, that's where it starts showing all the flashbacks. And this is what I love about James Wan 2. He did flashbacks very similar to Saw 1 and 2, where it showed, like, all the flashback scenes. Where it shows, you know, how he was talking to his dad, and then how, you know, his new wife, Ella, was always standing next to him, right? And then all of a sudden she would walk away, he would just go lump, right? Well, anyways, he starts piecing it all together, and then he's like, what the fuck is this, right? And all of a sudden, Billy the puppet is the only puppet that's still there. You know, he sees Mary Shaw, like, coming after him and shit. Then he finally throws the puppet in there, in the fire, because it's this big-ass mansion. And Mary Shaw goes away. And then that's when he starts to think, well, she can't be dead. Because if my dad's a dummy, then, like... And then all of a sudden starts showing the pictures, like, in the beginning, how it shows how she's building up, like, this perfect dummy, right? Well, they show that it shows this picture that's, like, taped up on the side, and they never show it. But in the end, it says, okay, the perfect dummy. You flip it over, and it shows Ella's face. And then all of a sudden, it shows Ella right behind him, and she goes, hello, Jamie. Who's the dummy now? Then he screams, ah! And she gets him, right? And then it recites the whole poem. Beware the stare of Mary Shaw. She had no children, only dolls. And if you see her in your dreams, be sure you never, ever scream. And then it shows, well, they were playing that poem. They basically show, like, the portraits of everybody already dead, but as dummies, you know, all propered up and everything. Then the film ends. And honestly, this was one of those films that I was the only person that went to go see it. You know, because everyone was all next door, you know, watching 300. But when I saw this film, I said, holy shit, this is great, right? But, you know, it's a downfall, though. It really is, because, you know, Lee Winnell and James Wan, they had such a rough experience with this, with Universal. This is from their interviews, purely, right? They basically said they didn't want to go through the whole issue of, as a writer, get paid, and then they have to be on a deadline to write this, to do that, you know? And they basically said that they'll never do that again because there was so many issues with the fact that they had to cut a lot of the scenes out. And if you see the DVD, because I don't think they released it on Blu-ray until 2014. Because you got to remember, at the time in 2007, that's when, you know, Blu-rays barely started to become big, you know? And they only released it straight to DVD after the film was released because, you know, it didn't do too well, right? But anyways, when they released it, basically it was just, you know, they came out and said it was one of the hardest films for them to do, James Wan and Leigh Whannell, because of the fact that they were always on this schedule. They always had to, you know, do things with other recording times. And it's just, they didn't think they put out the proper product that they wanted to. But the good thing that came out of it is that it inspired them to do films like Insidious, Conjuring, and they built many more franchises because of this film. They really did. You know, and then the fact that there was the wink of Annabelle already there, you know, and then the fact that they built, you know, Billy as this iconic character in the film. I'm surprised Universal never did anything with the rights to it. I mean, they still obviously own the rights, but I think it was 2007 or 2008, one of those years, they did a Dead Silence Maze. But that was the last you heard of it, you know? And a lot of people, they really didn't know what Dead Silence was until in 2010, 2011. And I say this strongly because a lot of people that I know and that I'm friends with, they don't watch as much horror films as I do, obviously. And so when they're telling me, hey, you know, have you heard of this film Dead Silence? I'm like, yeah, this is some good shit. Where are you seeing that? They're all like, oh, Netflix. Because this is back in 2010 when Netflix, they barely started doing the streaming thing and they started putting it on TVs and Xboxes and PlayStations and all that. So everyone started watching it and tuning in, and it became this, you know, underrated cult icon classic. And I love the film. I loved it when it first came out. I loved it even now. But it's funny that a lot of people forget about it because it was one of those films that just, you know, it stood out. It was so many good winks to it. Not only that, it was James Wan and Leigh Whannell. It was their first film away from Saw. So most people would think, okay, you know, you built Saw and that's it. But they think that, you know, when you get away from a franchise, can you build another franchise, right? They tried to do that with Dead Silence, but, you know, obviously it didn't do too well. They had it planned that they were going to do a sequel, but they never did the sequel because, you know, obviously the money wasn't right. And what blows me away is the fact that, you know, this movie had a budget of $20 million. So they had a lot of, you know, thought input into making this a good film. The only thing is just they released it at a wrong time. They really did. I think if they would have released this closer towards Halloween, it'd compete with Saw, then they didn't want to do that. I think if they would have released it probably like, I don't know, maybe in the summer, it would have done a lot better. It really would have. Because, you know, no one expected 300 to be this big hit that it was at the time, you know. And that was, you know, don't get me wrong, 300 was a good film, okay, but it killed anything, you know, of the Dead Silence franchise. It really did. But now, in 2018, there's rumors swirling around saying that they want to do a sequel, they want to do a reboot. I hope they don't do a reboot because you don't need to do a reboot. I think, you know, if they carry on from the sequel from Mary Shaw, I mean, you have a good iconic character right there that you could build off of, but who knows? We'll see what happens with that, right? But I thought it was pretty cool that James Wan and Leigh Whannell, they put a lot of winks into everything, you know? The main wink, obviously, was you see, you know, Billy from Jigsaw. Now, it's obviously Annabelle. At the time, most people didn't know what Annabelle was until 2013, 3 years later. No, 7, 8, 9, about 6 years later. Trying to do math in my head, you know? That was a wink right there to Annabelle. That was the next character that they wanted to do. And, you know, the clown doll one that they did, where Mary Shaw tells him that his wife was pregnant, was actually a wink to Poltergeist, which I thought was interesting, you know? So it's not like they don't know horror films. They know how to do it. And then the fact that they made it even spookier. But, you know, I would love for them to... it would have been great if they did a sequel because there's just so many unanswered questions. But this film reminds me of kind of like the original Halloween. It really does, because it's mysterious. How do you know that Mary Shaw was crazy? Or how do you know that she was a witch? How do you know that she was spiritual and she can control all these dolls and stuff like that? They didn't explain any of that. I was like, man, I need to know this shit. Right? I mean, let me know in the comments below. I mean, were you asking yourself that? Because I was when I was watching the film. I was just like, holy shit. There's so many unanswered questions that we'll probably never even know unless they either reboot it or do a sequel. But we'll see. But anyways, like I said, this film, it's so underrated, and it's barely getting the attention now. You know, here it's 11 years later, but it's finally getting the good due attention because it inspired James Wan and Lee Winnell to go and make other horror franchises. Obviously, James Wan and Lee Winnell, they didn't work together when they did Conjuring, but they worked together to do Insidious. And, you know, I see the clown that they did, like, kind of inspiration a little bit towards Insidious because of the red hair and everything. A little bit of Saw because it had the swirl on the forehead. But also, too, the biggest wink that I got out of it when I was watching it was like, what the fuck? That's Annabelle right there. I'm watching this on the DVD. You know, I'm not watching Blu-ray where it's like crisp and clear and everything. But I thought it was pretty interesting how they did that, you know? And the whole story of how they put so much effort and time into this. And then the fact that Universal, I would love to see Universal do something with it. Because, you know, yeah, they did probably 1 or 2 horror mazes for it for Halloween Horror Nights. But bring it back, man. I mean, that... You got a spooky ghost story that has creepy dolls. I mean, you got best of both worlds into one, right? But hope you all enjoy this episode of Dead Silence. I hope I don't continue the trend of keep doing like a James Wan film all the time because I want to save some good ones, you know, because James Wan, he's done a lot of good films that I like. But, you know, hope you enjoy this episode. And as always, you know, I'll catch y'all next time.
Bow down to the